Hi, today we are fixing a Freelander1, Landrover Freelander1 front window and its motor. So what happened was the window stuck down. So for a change, I am showing the completely dismantled window rail and motor, as you can see here. And most of this video is going to be showing the reassembly, which is actually the trickiest part. And for disassembly, of course, you just do it in reverse. So rather than show both sides, we'll just show the tricky side. And as we know, taking things apart is often easier than putting them back together again. These mechanisms are a little bit tricky because they're all cable operated, as you can see here. And as you dismantle it, it all unwinds from the reel, and you've got to work out how it goes back together again. So I think the problem with the motor was basically that it got a bit stiff with old age. It's over 10 years old. Grease got a bit stiff. You could hear the motor trying to operate, but the window went down and wouldn't go up again. And once I got the cover of the motor off, this is the actual motor internals, then it was quite stiff to turn. So what I'm going to do is lubricate it up with moly grease. This gear comes out. This motor section also pulls out. It's easier if you take the gear out first. Let's just rip that out like so. Don't lose the little whale seal on the end. And then this motor section comes out as well. Good idea to clean up the copper on this commutator. Get a bit of fine sandpaper, just run over that, which I'll do in a minute. Alright, so this is the motor and the gears all disassembled. So I've applied some moly grease over the gears, bottom of this one, just a light piece. And what we've then got to do is assemble in the right order. So I've cleaned up the commutator, as you can see here, with a bit of sandpaper. So easiest way to do that is just wrap it around, rotate it in your hand, clean it up like so. Nice and shiny now. So we have to assemble this in the right order. So first of all, we assemble the brush housing, and then we have to assemble the shaft and the center part of the motor. Now that is going to be a little bit tricky because at the same time we've got to do the brushes, which are pushed out by springs here. So what we've got to do is push these springs back and fit the brushes, and then get the rotor part of the motor into place. Now this is a little bit tricky because you could do with a few more fingers. Damn. This is hard. Alright, so we've got to push the spring in, get the brush on top, try and get it in its hole at the same time. Also make sure the brush is the right way round, with it curved around the commutator of the rotor, which is basically the copper shiny bit that you've just cleaned up. Quite tricky this. There we go. Right, that's one in place, as you can see. Now I've just got to do the other one. Okay, that's two done. And now we've got to try and keep both of them in while we fit the shaft of the motor. That is going to be difficult. is where we need a little screwdriver, I think. Let's use the screwdriver to hold back one of the brushes and then lever it over the commutator part of the rotor, and what we then need to do is get the other one pushed back like so. There we go. That's what we're trying to achieve, is to get both brushes to be either side of this center rotating part of the motor, which is the commutator. Yeah, hopefully that's the right way around. Let's just check. That goes back like so into the housing. Everything rotates correctly, nice and smoothly. So then, having cleaned up and greased up previously, put a little bit of moly grease around these gears. None of them look too bad either. That moly grease will spread around as the gears move. But just about add a little bit more onto it. So next we can fit that gear like so, and then the next gear, which has the oil seal in the centre of it to make sure it's still fitted. That then goes on top. Let's just see how that goes. Looks like that. And then we could, I suppose, fit the housing of the motor. Just make sure that's clean. Sometimes these can get a little bit rusty inside, and the rust can jam against the motor. So make sure that hasn't happened. Quite a common thing, and stop it rusting in the future. Give it a nice little spray of light oil, like WD-40 or the like. Also lubricates the bearing at the bottom. Yeah, we've got to try and work out which way this motor goes round, because it can be fitted either way round. And unfortunately, if you get it the wrong way round, then the motor starts going the other direction, which is not a complete disaster on a window motor. Just means the switches work in the opposite direction. The only way of telling is if you take a picture of it previously or remembered. So I believe from memory, this little W sign here, looks like VW or something, was facing the outside, and the motor gets fitted that way round, so which means it must go in that orientation. This foam piece on that side. So we've got some screws to fit there, which we will do. Let's just fit one to keep it in place. Okay, and then this other housing gets fitted. Let's see, it only fits one way. Make sure your gasket is in place, and that looks like it fits that way around. Okay, and then we can fit the screws that hold that in place. Once we've done this, we can actually test whether the motor operates or not. So what you can do is apply 12 volts either way around to these pins. One way around, the motor should go one way, and in the other the opposite direction. So to get those 12 volts, or that 12 volts, you could connect it back up to the car. Use the same connector and the same window switch with the ignition on to turn the motor on. Press the window up and window down button. Or as I'm going to do in a minute, see if I can operate it from my 12 volt power supply. And when I tested the motor, actually it showed up the original fault, that it worked for a little bit and then it stopped. So I've taken out the gear again and slackened off the bolts holding the outer part of the motor on, and we can see if we connect power, sometimes the motor will work, depending on the exact alignment of this outer housing. So probably a bit of rust has got in there, so what we're going to have to do is dismantle the motor again, unless we can find a good position when we do up the nuts, or screws rather, of this motor housing, that the motor works correctly all the time. But I think we'll take it apart and have another good look at it. So looking at the clearance between the magnets and the rotor, you can see moves from side to side. There is a bit of clearance, and there's no indications of wear marks on the rotor from what I can see. So I don't think it's a case of the or any rust pushing out the magnets. So I believe what it turned out to be is the bearing at the end of the motor, right down there, had got, I don't know, a bit corroded or dried up or something, and I had to run a 9mm drill bit down there, clear it out a little bit, and to feel whether it's running smoothly, you can actually swap it over to the other end of the motor, and it interferes with the magnets less, and just give it a feel as to whether that's free running or not. I think that is now good enough, so we'll reassemble, test the motor again, put a little drop of oil down the bottom to keep that lubricated. So that's it, reassembled into the magnets again. A bit tricky getting those brushes in place. You need a fair bit of patience and a tiny little screwdriver to help you push the springs and the brushes into position. Just check it moves reasonably smoothly, which it now does. And I believe on mine, if it's like this, you've got a little marking there, the rubber, that connector faces that way around. So then we need to reassemble back in its housing. And we'll just check it runs smoothly in that bearing as well, which it does. If it doesn't, again run your 9mm drill bit through there, which is an exact fit, just to clear out any bits of crud. And we'll also add a little bit of oil to the bearing surface, and then we can refit this. Just check which way around that goes. So it's in that sort of orientation. And it pushes in like so. And then we have the gear. So next we're testing our motor, as you can see, with it partially open. And if you can hear or see, there's a little section of it there, where it slows down and is binding on something. So I think that's the next thing to investigate. There's some sort of problem with the nylon gear. So we'll go over all these gears, cleaning out each slot just with this little screwdriver to check for any particles or any contaminants in there, or maybe squash bits of plastic. There's a little bit of a squash bits of plastic there actually. Yeah, I don't know whether that'll come out, you can see that on the camera, but it certainly feels like a little bit of plastic has got squashed and it's actually narrowed the groove somewhat. So what we'll do is get a little Stanley blade and just cut that nylon back a little bit to allow it the same gap all the way down the slot. And where you think is a little bit narrow, just get your Stanley blade and mind your fingers, but just run it down the slot and try and cut off any high spots, possibly caused by maybe the motor just sitting in one place for a long time, because this is the passenger window motor, so I guess it doesn't get used very much, and when it's in the closed position for so long, I guess the motor is continuously pushing against the gear, and maybe over the years the nylon actually moves a little bit and makes the gear basically not quite so good. squashes the nylon a little bit. So I think maybe that's why it had a little awkward spot on it and why the motor had seized. So we might as well go through all of these slots on here, try and avoid that problem in the future. Okay, so after a bit of cleaning, a bit of cutting out of these slots in the gears, it is now rotating somewhat more consistently, both directions. Actually, the motor is going slower than it will do in its real application, because our power supply can't quite deliver enough current. It's only delivering about 3 amps. I think they take a fair bit more than that when they're operating. But even if you put your fingers on it, try and slow it down, it never really gets stuck. It always keeps on moving and restarts again after you manually stop it. So I believe that is now going to operate correctly. Test it in both directions by reversing the connection to the motor, and again check that it operates smoothly, consistently, doesn't get stuck anywhere. So now it's good for reassembly. Put some grease on it as well. So the next tricky thing is to reassemble the cabling and its bobbin and fit that correctly in the gear. So obviously this motor arrangement in the gearbox goes on like that. To be able to see the bobbin easily, I'm going to turn this whole assembly over. But before I do that, I'll just grease up that part of the metal that the bobbin sits on so that it moves smoothly. Turn this all over. This is how it finally assembles, and now he's got to work out how all these cables go together. Let's just do that loosely so that we can see how that's going to go together. We've got it in having been loosely assembled. At least we know the twist on the cable is about right, and then we'll rewind it a bit tighter going backwards. That bit of cable is a little bit rusty there, so put some oil on that when you come to finally finish it off. There's not too much twist on the cable, which is a good thing. And then we'll finish this top part, and now we've just got to fit it in the assembly. Right, now everything's getting in the way. Let's just put that on the top. Right, that's got to go there. This one it's got to go in here. Rewinding the bobbin is something that requires a little bit of patience, so what I would suggest is maybe fitting this cable first and then fitting the top cable. As you can see, there's a bit of difficulty pulling on the cable, tensioning it enough to get it in place while holding the bobbin and the cables in place. So what I'm going to do is release the tension on the cable a bit by pulling it off one of those wheels that guide the cable around the loop. That then enables us to fit the bobbin a little bit easier, and hopefully we can get the cable over that wheel at the end. So hold these in position while fitting it under the cover, and if we can get our bolts in place, that will then hold everything together. Oh, don't forget we have got this piece, this piece of plastic to fit as well. Might be something to do with holding the cable in place possibly, rather than just a blanking plug. Yeah, I think it helps to guide the cable into its grooves, so that's a fairly necessary piece of plastic. Right, everything just about in place. Just needs a little twist. There we go. Right, everything's now lined up. And then refit screws. Okay, that's the motor assembled back on again. So all that is left now is to try and restore the tension in the cable by fitting the cable over this pulley wheel, which may be tricky, may not be. I don't think there's any other way of relieving the tension from what I can see. Yeah, maybe this outer piece of plastic is shaped like that for a reason. We'll try, let's get the cable over this outer section of the wheel first, which is still difficult. I'm going to have to use that screwdriver. Okay. Come on, turn round. Right, now it's on the outer section of the wheel, hopefully you can see there. What we can hopefully do next is to rotate this wheel, and you can see the outer section. We'll then push and tighten up the cable. Let's see, get this to turn. At the same time, we can start pushing the cable so that it goes around the main section of the pulley wheel. This is obviously designed with this in mind. Just need to get a screwdriver in a slot to be able to turn it, which is easier said than done. Not quite got the right size here. Let's get another screwdriver. Right, that's it. You see now, you can see a little bit closer that the cable is being forced to go into. Ah, damn it! It will be forced. Yep. It's now forced to go into its correct position on the outer part of the pulley. So everything is now well tensioned. All we've got to do now is test it again with our power supply. I think we might need to connect it to a car battery to get some more current. Let's see. Yep. Okay, now we've got the extra current capacity of a car battery connected. If we test it again, we can see it now smoothly operates down and then up. Make sure you stop before these runners get to the end of the rail, because they will shoot off the end. Normally, of course, it's the window pane reaching the top of the door that stops that happening. Run up and down a few times, make sure it all works well. So now we've just got to reassemble it back into the door frame. Before we do that, we will just run a little bit of oil up and down the cabling, a little bit on the pulley, just to stop this cable rusting, which can be an issue with old cars, of course. Over on the end of the cable as well, and hopefully that'll prevent problems in the future. So now that we've got the motor and track assembly all built up again, it's a matter of assembling it back into the door frame. This is where you have to take note of how it actually disassembles from the door. And one thing to note is that we've suspended the glass, disconnected it from the frame by a couple of bolts, and it's just strapped up with some tape going over the top of the door just to hold the glass out of the way. So it's a little bit of a struggle to get this whole mechanism in and out. So what we'll try and do is get the big part in first. So I think like so. Okay, then we have it aligned roughly in this sort of arrangement. We have the motor that side, the other half this side. You see these bolts line up with these holes here. So these are all the bolts that hold the window mechanism in place. One here for the left hand side, one here for the right hand side. Oh sorry, also one here for the right hand side, including the motor. For the window, You have to have the window somewhat lowered to get to the window pane release bolts, or you have to get your hand up to reach these bolts. So they're basically at the bottom of the window pane. These bolts need releasing by quite a few turns, these ones here, and it's probably a good idea to just lever these bits of rubber and clamp pieces off from the glass. Be careful you don't break the glass. The glass should then lift out of these clamps, and then you need to lift up the glass out of the way if you're unassembling it and tape it up to the top of the door. So obviously now we are assembling it. We do up these bolts, make sure they're in the original position, plug in the cable which is underneath that. That's the plug there on the bottom of the motor, and it has a few clips on the cable. You can see one there that pokes through this hole here, which you need to squeeze the outside of if you want to release them. And there's another one, there's clips in there, and there's actually another one there as well. So squeeze those bits of plastic to release them, or just push them back in again to reassemble. So the other thing you might want to check on, and might be at fault, is the actual window switch itself. So you pull it out basically by undoing 4 screws on the top of the glove box holder, and get your hand in the back there, push out the switch from behind. Then it's just a matter of disconnecting the connector. The switch itself you can pull apart by getting your fingernail down in between this outer plastic and the inner part. You can see these little clips here that I've just released. Then you can pull it apart, and it has all these little bits inside, and you can see some of these contacts are quite corroded, so we're going to clean those up with a little bit of sandpaper as well, so that may be stopping your window from perhaps moving in one direction. Reassembling this part is fairly obvious. These tiny little pointy bits go in the holes there, like so. That's the arrangement. Make sure you've still got these spring-loaded nylon parts, and then we just need to reinsert it. And just check the switch still operates correctly. And now we can test whether the window works. Ignition on, pulling on the switch, the window goes up, the window goes down nicely and moves reasonably quickly. So that's it. Window's fixed. Now we've got to assemble the door card. One thing I didn't mention is we've got to have this metal strap also mounted by this bolt, which we'll do. So next we re-tape up the polythene vapor barrier. This one obviously previously been taken apart. There's a bit of tape on it, so just added to that. Stops you getting condensation inside the door, I believe, from the warm air inside the car. So it's a good idea to reapply it. Most garages don't bother doing that, by the way. So it's another benefit of doing things yourself, to do it properly. So this is door card assembly. You can see how it's joined. It's a combination of bolts and these pressing fittings. So you might find that these are left behind on the door. If that's the case, it's best to remount them on the door card. And these little plastic fittings go into like holes on the door. It's quite a firm push-in fitting. To remove them, once you remove the bolts, you just need to give the door card a firm pull to release the clips. And to refit, you just need to line them up and give it a hard thump to mount them back again. I'll have to put the camera down to do that because it's a bit of a two-handed job. Don't forget to put it over your door lock button clip as well. It can be easier to also remove the plastic cover and speaker. Then you can see a bit more precisely whether these pins line up in the holes. Once you think they do, give it a hard thump like so with your fist. To make sure everything's in place. And obviously to remove it, once you release the bolts, and give it a sharp tug. So the bolts or screws, there's 2 on the handle. There's one that holds the inner door handle surround. There's one behind this plastic plug, one here, and 2 more under the door storage compartment. So you can see here the sort of clips that are used. That's push firm fitting into the door, and on the other end, this end goes onto the actual piece of plastic. So as I say, it's often easier to mount them onto the thing that's being pushed onto the door, so you can then just give it a firm push into place. Now this one needs a bit of a thump, like so, until when they've gone home fully, because you've got 0 gaps down here. And then reassemble the plastic cover and speaker, give that a bit of a thump, like so. So that's the door card all reassembled, and one final check that the window works correctly. So I think in the end it was probably a combination of things, 2 things. The window motor itself was going very stiff just due to old age, and needed those bearings lubricating and a general clean up. And as a result of the extra current drawn by the motor, because it was getting stiff and the whole mechanism was getting stiff, then the switch itself, the contacts were probably arcing somewhat because they were a little bit carbonized up, and the up button, the contacts for the up button were particularly carbonized, which stops the window from going up. So now that everything has been looked at, the whole mechanism, the motor's been stripped down, contacts in the switch have been cleaned up, everything is working as it should. Right, good luck with yours. So it's possible to do it without spending any money, just needed a little bit of time to dismantle everything. Good luck with yours, and thanks for watching. Bye.